Hello, everyone. Can you hear me? Okay, great. I'd like to start by thanking Iti for giving me this opportunity to share my story. As Bharat said, that I've got some buzzwords written here already. You know, today is a day for collaborations, for partnerships, for leveraging. Um, And in my world, when I look at all these terms, I think of ecosystems, I think of sharing, I think of stories, and I think of putting each other out there. And in all this, I do think of women a lot, because today's platform I see as a very powerful platform. And when I say powerful, um, I say that because when a group of women decide to invest in themselves and take control of carving out their own path, their own journeys, that's a very powerful force for positive change in the world. And the reason for that is when women leaders do anything, they take everyone with them. They nurture the people that they serve, they nurture the people that they work with, and they think long term. You know, they don't always just think of short-term gains. And most of all, most importantly, they share. They pass on their knowledge. And it's the spirit of sharing, in other words, perhaps leveraging, but more like sharing, that I'm here today. And I'm putting myself out here in front of everyone here. So I would like to consider myself as not very eminent. I'm on a journey, but yes, I'm putting myself out there, and hence I believe there is power in sharing. So we are going to create a lot of power here today. So this time, my introduction. I'm Sheba. I'm a mother foremost. I'm a life partner. And I'm founder and CEO of an organization called ALAP. ALAP is a social change organization that works in forestry and leadership. And currently, I'm working with mountain communities in Uttarakhand. So when we talk about cold weather in Bangalore, you know, we understand what relativity means. I just spoke to my colleagues this morning, and we've got all our work held up because we've got our land covered with snow, and no one's turned up to work. So this is really pleasant here, to be honest with you. But if I'd met you 10 years ago, I would have introduced you myself as Sheba, a dreamer, a seeker, and a corporate lawyer working in one of the top international law firms. So there's something that happened in the last decade, in the last 10 years, that a transition was made from a lawyer to a social entrepreneur, and from the high-level buildings of London to the remote mountain villages of India in the Himalayas. And that is what I want to share today with all of you. So just as a bit of background, I'm the second born in my family. I was born in Lucknow in UP. And for most of my growing up years, my father worked in a sugarcane processing company as a marketing officer, and my mother was a homemaker. From the age of 4, I was brought up in the suburbs of Delhi, and what I consider to be a quite typical middle-class Indian family: values, dreams, and aspirations. I would be the hard-working daughter. I was very diligent. I would get good grades at school. I would become the house captain. Then I would study at the University of Delhi. Then I would get a scholarship to pursue my master's degree in the UK. And when I was sent to the UK, it was also the dreams and aspirations of my family. I was to get good grades, I was to focus on my studies, but more importantly, I was to get a well-paying job and a visa extension. Now, miraculously, I did tick all these boxes. By the age of 25, I had degrees from 2 of the top universities in England. I had secured a job as a lawyer in a big firm. And more importantly, I'd also fallen in love. And this was Rohit, now my husband, who was a banker, and he was British. So I was cruising it. I had ticked all the boxes and I had a life charted out in front of me. But we all know what's coming. This was my external reality. And at the age, in my mid-20s, I realized that the truth was that I was feeling hollow inside. I was battling a constant emotion of feeling like a failure. And no one around me, including Rohit, would understand that. Because I had created a reality that I did not belong to. So it was during that time that I started to question, who was I? And also, who do I want to become? And I believe, the benefit of hindsight, that what I am becoming today had its genesis 10 years ago. So for the next 3 years, I would continue to work at the law firm and to save a lot of money because there was a lot to be saved. And when I'd saved enough, I resigned and I came back to India. Oops, sorry. Now, my return to India presented me with a blank canvas. And really, all that I knew at that time was that I wanted to work in rural India, the deep hinterlands of our country, where 70%, nearly 70% of our population still lives and struggles to have a dignified life. I was hot-blooded, strong-minded, and I wanted to change that. But I did realize that any change, inner and outer, takes time, and often change presents itself in terms of progress and not necessarily change. And so with this spirit and this awareness, I set myself to start another journey, which I didn't know how it will pan out. So for a year after I was back, I got an opportunity to work with coffee farmers in Karnataka, in Chikmagalur and Coorg. And that was my first time that I had exposure to working in rural India. And my job was to figure out a supply chain from farm to shop in a way that was best possible returns to the coffee farmer. And it was at that time that I understood that in the coffee industry in India, why the coffee farmer is repeating generation after generation a circle of poverty, because it's rife with middlemen. So the amount of work that you put in does not balance or is equivalent to the amount of returns that you get in. And hence, poverty continues. So if I was to think about alleviating poverty in my own country, I had to understand the finer details of it, that how it plays out. So I continued doing this for 1 year. And in that 1 year, a chance encounter led my husband and I for a visit for 1 week to the mountains of Uttarakhand. And in the summer of 2012, we found ourselves here for just a break for 1 week. And this is where we have a home now as well. And when I look back at this picture, I frankly thought I'd arrived at the most beautiful place in the world. I didn't know this is in my own country. I didn't know that. And soon I was to find that the people who lived here didn't think so. They'd rather prefer to live in an urban slum than to live here because there was nothing for them here. And soon I was to find out that what it looks like, the reality is slowly changing. And because it's happening at a pace when we live in our lives, we don't really understand, we feel it's all fine. So things moved on fast from here. Soon after our visit, I researched, I worked hard, I reached out, I networked, I put myself out there, and I found myself a job in an established development organization called Arohi, which I didn't found, but I was leading it for some time, who was working in this region with the farmers to have livelihood enterprises, to have a little school for better education for their children, and they were also working with young mothers and children for better health opportunities. So I said, that's the best ground for me to learn. And little did I know that this was the place where my dream, my aspirations, and this time my reality of working in the rural landscape of India would start to unveil. So for the next 4 years, I worked at Arohi, and I learned the building blocks of rural development. I gave myself time to learn, and in the language of business, I learned my landscape, I learned my market, I learned my customers. I'm not talking in NGO jargon here, I'm talking from the point of how powerful entrepreneurship can be. Because if I was to work and make a difference, I needed to understand my landscape, and I needed to invest time and effort in it. And I invested 4 years doing that with Arohi. And what did I learn? To start with, I learned that for any rural family, their economy is their forests, their ecology. There are 3 pillars that support the survival of any rural family, lest in the mountains, in the whole of India, and in the whole of the world, wherever in the world we are to go. There are 3 pillars: water, something that we don't often think about, cattle, and farming. And what is the backbone of these 3 pillars? It's forests. And I understood that in 4 years. It took me 4 years to condense this learning in 1 sentence. And if we are to alleviate poverty, if we are to change the path of India, then we have to understand these building blocks or what are causing poverty. And I also understood that the rivers of our country are drying. I understood that the desertifications of our mountains is a real thing, that the wildlife in our country is vanishing, that the development model that India is aspiring for, and rightly so, is struggling to be sustainable, and it's certainly not inclusive. So can we really progress if we are not thinking about these things? I started to learn these things. I started to think about it. And most often than not, I didn't have any answer, and that's also the situation right now. It's figuring things out as you go along. It's never clear. You never really know exactly that this is how it's going to pan out, but we question. And what I also understood, that any change, when we are serving our customers, when we are serving our communities, we have to invest in people. So for me, I was interested in the rural landscape. And for me, my people were the communities who were living in the closest proximity to the forests of our country. And I understood that unless I invest in these people and not just the problem, change is not going to happen. Because change happens because of you and I. Today is an investment in ourselves. And so for me, a rural development paradigm would focus on investing in people. And for me, that defined as leadership. So that was the genesis that I decided after 4 years that I've learned. I resigned from Arohi the second time in my life when I was making a swerve to much anxiety amongst my family. But you have got to put yourself out there. But sometimes that's bigger than us, because it's not always about us. It's true. And you feel that force. And when I took this decision to resign from Arohi, ALAP was founded. And the mission of ALAP would be to bring back our lost native forests by enabling people to create them. And we would work on science, bringing the best of science and technology to the rural parts of our country, and also building leadership amongst people, and hence really be known as a leadership organization as we grow. So that is what brings me to ALAP, and I'm sort of interweaving the stories. And whatever we do, we know that here, all of us who are here, our businesses, our works, our enterprises are not dissociated from who we are, from who our loved ones are. They are a part of our journey. And that's where stories intermingle. And it's good and it's fine to acknowledge that. And it's fine to bring yourself into what you're doing, because that's what touches people. That's what touches people and makes them see the why you're doing this. So I've got a 2-minute video here that will give you the context of where ALAP is working. And how does it see the solution to the problem that I've said was the dwindling ecology of our country?
I want to save the forests because there's something magical about our forests. There's something healing about our forests. And what's happening today is, this whole imbalance in the world. If we look at climate change, we look at our drying rivers, we talk about desertification of the Himalayas. The root cause of all this is our forests. And where I work in the state of Uttarakhand in central Himalayas, 80% of our forest land is not native. It's monocultured pine forests. So it may look green from a distance, but what really happens is the wrong kind of green.
चीड़ को ख़त्म करना चाहिए। चीड़ में से कोई मतलब आदमियों को फ़ायदा नहीं है उसमें से। ना तो बारिश पानी का रुकाव है उसमें, ना कोई चीज़ में कोई संबंध है। चीड़ के जंगल से पत्ती बिछाएं गायों को या लकड़ी जलाएं, उसके से चीड़ों के जंगल से कोई संबंध नहीं है।
बंदरों का बढ़ावा हो रहा है, गुणी का बढ़ावा हो रहा है, लेकिन वो चारा कहाँ से खाते हैं? जब जंगल ही नहीं है तो चारा कहाँ से खाते हैं? उनका भी भोजन ख़त्म हो गया है, तो काश्तकारों के खेतियों में अटैक करते हैं।
Also we use a Japanese scientist technique called Dr. Miyawaki, which is a technique used to bring back the native species. And it's been tried all over the world, and the first time ever a lab tried it in the Indian Himalayas earlier this year. And we are waiting to see the results. I'm positive it's going to work.
हमें सिर्फ बाँस, बुरांस, ये जंगल और खरसू, मोरू, इन चीज़ों से हमें फ़ायदा है। हमें लकड़ी मिले, गायों को बिछाने के लिए पत्ती मिले, उसके नीचे थोड़ा बहुत घास हो गया गाय बकरियों के लिए मिले, ये अच्छा है। सब चीज़ पले जंतु इसमें।
We're going to save the forest by actually creating them, and by creating them with community leadership, with community movement. We work with young people in the region. We work with community leaders to bring back their own forests in their own backyard.
So very quickly, I'm not going to make it too boring. There was a phrase in the video that said it's the wrong kind of green, and every single time when I've talked about it, it's amazing how people said, I never realized that, because you think green is good. But we can have the wrong kind of green. And just to start with, what a wrong kind of green can do for us. So in Uttarakhand, we are in the lushest vegetation zone of the world. Despite 70% of our land in the state covered in green, it is the second worst state in India for water management. This is according to the Niti Aayog report in 2017. Only second to Nagaland, which is another mountain state. And then less than 5% of rainwater is actually used to harvest underground water. I mean, where does water come to us in the cities? It comes to us from our rivers. And where do rivers get water? Rivers get water from the forests that surround them. Because when it rains, it's the forest, the right kind of forest, who soak this water in their roots and then recharge the water underground. Our wells, our rivers, our water sources are all recharged by our trees. And despite 70% of the state covered in green, less than 0.5% of water is actually going underground. The rest of it is surface runoff, and with the surface runoff, our soil goes away as well. So really all that we grow, we eat, is 6 inches of soil, and all that soil in the Himalayas has gone. More than 50% of water sources in the state have shown a reduced discharge. In other words, they're drying. So what does that mean? So if I'm living there and I need water, on an average, as a woman, I'll walk 10 kilometers a day to fetch water. What does that mean? I can't invest in myself, I can't look after my children, I'm socially marginalized, and in any country where women are not invested on or do not have the basics in place, it cannot progress, because we cannot alleviate poverty. It's the reality. And also natural disasters like floods, forest fires. These are all results of our ecology. And what happens when, when such events occur? There's human loss, and there's billions of dollars that are used to resurrect these lands and these communities, which could otherwise be used for the progress of the country. And there are also these plantations, and this wrong kind of green is one of the most exacerbating factors for climate change, and hence our rising temperatures. Now, what is the problem? What is the wrong kind of green? I mean, just very briefly, the problem of deforestation in India started during the colonial period. We needed to make, well, the government needed to make railways. So to get the wood for the railways, Indian forests were very lucrative. And also it was pre-World War time, so a lot of forest wood from our forests was exported to Europe to make ships for war. So the thought was that the forests of India, which were called the Mahavans, were inexhaustible. But the reality is they're not inexhaustible. And we lost most of our natural, virgin, mixed native forests during those 200 years. And what replaced that and continues after independence is commercial tree plantations. Now the thing is, a group of trees don't make a forest. And that is where we're going to talk about. That is where we talk about how we need to create a business out of this, which is for social good. And this problem exists all over the country. I mean, we are starting from Himalayas because we were already there. You go to the Western Ghats, which is closer to Karnataka, to Bangalore. Eucalyptus plantations are the bane of that hotspot. You go to central India. I've been to Bundelkhand. I'm from UP, and I studied that area, to Madhya Pradesh. It's the central forests of India. The Mahavans of India, as we're referred to, are all now what we call as Vilaiti babul, the acacias, which is a South American exotic species. Drying water, absolutely of no use to the people who live there. And hence, poverty continues because your basics aren't met. So what do we do about it? I mean, this is a huge problem. And you have to understand the DNA of a lab is a lawyer. We've got an engineer working with us. We've got a rural development officer, professional working with us. And we've got a management graduate working with us. We've got a team of core team of 4 people. None of us are foresters. None of us are scientists. Our DNA is to work with people. Our DNA is enterprise. Our DNA is leadership. How do we approach this problem? But the thing is, if your intent is right, and you're aware of your DNA, your impact can stretch. And that's where partnerships come. So when you understand an ecosystem in nature, you understand that you don't have to do everything yourself. You know your bit well, and then you get the others to make an ecosystem that produces a result, produces impact. So we understood that it took 200 years in a very naive way to change these forests. Our natural forests were gone and we got plantations. Can we just start recreating them? Why not? It's silly, but let's start from them. We can start recreating forests. One of the missions in India of the Indian government is the 8th mission, Green India Mission. It's got a budget of over 1,500 crores, which is all our money. It's taxpayers' money. Afforestation is, everyone does afforestation. Everyone plants a tree. There's nothing intellectual about it. There's nothing funky about it. There's nothing innovative about it. But what are the results we are seeing? India is still ranking in the top 10 countries who have highest rates of deforestation, highest rates of pollution, highest rates of poverty, highest rates of species loss, wildlife threatened. Where is this 1,500 crores going? Do we need some innovation here? Do we need to really balance and think about a development model that is inclusive but also sustainable if we are to progress? Time will tell. So we said that our mission will be to bring back native forests, and we are going to first find out that is there any scientific technology, scientific research that has got a better way of growing trees than we've been doing so far. And that's when I came across this guy on YouTube. I YouTubed. And people would have heard of permaculture, organic farming, zero budget farming. All of these things What Dr. Miyawaki is to natural forests is like permaculture to farming. And I started researching, and I figured out that this guy is making forests all over the world with immense success. 90% of his saplings survive. We talk about afforestation programs. Do we ever think about that tree we've planted? Does it ever live? Are we planting a tree or are we creating a forest? We don't think about it because no one's educating us about this. Whether it's in the city or whether it's in the rural areas, that's irrespective. And when I started to study this guy, I learned that he's obviously planted over 40 million trees all over the world, and he's worked in all sorts of ecosystems. And that's where partnerships and ecosystem thinking arrived. I researched more, and many of you might be aware of Shubhendu, who's a dear friend who works in a forest. And I was Googling him and trying his method on my own, just behind my home. And I happened to meet Shubhendu, who was a friend, and he said, hey, you know, I'm working on this as well. I said, great, share your notes with me. Share. Let's do something together. Let's be partners. Partners in spirit. You don't always have to have a treaty or a agreement to be partners. Let's be partners in spirit. So we exchanged notes, and like many others who are doing this method, in August 2017, we planted a native forest patch behind our home. Oh, sorry. I'll just show you some of the impact that Dr. Miyawaki has had in his work. This is a 10-year picture in Japan. This was his first project in 1979. So in August 2017, a bunch of 4 of us, who is now our core team, we got together and we planted this native forest of 320 saplings in a 10 meter by 10 meter patch, which is 100 square meters, often a little bigger than a bedroom. 9 months later, it started to look like this. And 1 year later, it looked like this. And suddenly you realize that there's a better way of growing trees. And this is a very powerful tool. I felt so powerful that I can make a forest. And this is like a cross-section of a big forest. Up until now, when we think in scientific terms, we think about conservation, it feels big. It feels outside our circle of influence. We are making a sanctuary, or we are combating climate change. What can you and I do in that, right? But this thing empowered me. I can plant little forests, and that'll restore my habitat. And really, honestly, in 1 year, we've got a little deer, whom we call Bambi, and his mother, who live here. Because they don't live in the pine plantations. So they have started to come here every night, and rather causing havoc to our forest, but they start living here. This was in just 12 months. We've got mushrooms growing there, we've got butterflies coming. It's incredible. So then we started, delving more and more into the science of the system, and the basic difference is that we plant in layers. So we don't just dig a hole and plant a sapling. There's a whole method to it, and we understand which species to plant. They're all native, and we plant in vertical layers like shrub layer, subtree, tree, canopy. And there's a reason why these forests grow the way they do. And there's a 1-minute video that explains what happens underneath the soil. I think, Amrita, I need to play the second video.
Trees may look like solitary individuals, but the ground beneath our feet tells a different story. Trees are secretly talking, trading, and waging war on one another. They do this using a network of fungi that grow around and inside their roots. The fungi provide the trees with nutrients, and in return they receive sugars. But scientists have found this connection runs far deeper than first thought. By plugging into the fungal network, trees can share resources with each other. The system has been nicknamed the Wood Wide Web. It's thought that older trees, fondly known as mother trees, use this fungal network to supply shaded seedlings with sugars, giving them a better chance of survival. Those trees that are sick or dying may dump their resources into the network, which might then be used by healthier neighbours. Plants also use fungi to send messages to one another. If they're attacked, they can release chemical signals through their roots, which can warn their neighbours to raise their defences. But like our internet, the Wood Wide Web has its dark side too. Some orchids hack the system to steal resources from nearby trees. And other species, like the black walnut, spread toxic chemicals through the network to sabotage their rivals. Arboreal cybercrime aside, scientists are still debating why plants seem to behave in such an altruistic way. The hidden network creates a thriving community between individuals. When you're next in woodland, you might like to think of trees as part of a big superorganism, chatting and swapping information and food under your feet.
So this is a bit like what your next session will look like of networking, because it's happening all around us all the time. And the key thing to learn from here is that we've always thought that in nature, trees and everyone is competing for light, for survival. But what science is revealing to us, and this is only in the last 30 years, and in the next 20 years, 30 years, I see this sort of science becoming the mainstream, is that there is a lot of cooperation, that it is not just a bunch of trees who are by individuals surviving or competing to grow, but they are helping each other. They're forming networks, because anything that has to thrive is to work like an ecosystem. And this is the DNA through science that we are trying to imbibe in our work in entrepreneurship building. So what we did is we broke down the science into 6 very simple steps. We say you do a soil survey, then you understand your native species, then you procure the saplings or grow nurseries, prepare the soil, you plant, and then you monitor it for 2 to 3 years, and then it's a self-sustaining ecosystem. So we broke it down that anyone, someone in this room or a woman who's illiterate in the villages of India, can understand this method and get going. We got a great break. We approached the local government. We had a great bureaucrat. He got really excited about this. And he said, fine, I'm going to give you a piece of land. You start using that as your lab. That's our innovation lab. This is what our labs look like. And we start planting, and we start creating our brand. We start creating our product. And we reach out to the rural customer to say, hey, you can plant your own forest, and we're there to help you. So last summer, we mobilized about 430 community members and also the state. We are taking the state with us, as excruciating as it is. We are taking the government with us because it's an ecosystem. Both sides of the coin need to get on with this, and they need to act, and they need to act fast. And we had a great response. Children, workers, this is a PWD worker in the government, women. This is what a scene looked like. We planted 7,000 saplings in one day. So in total, we've planted about 14,000 saplings so far. And this is where we market our product. This is what our land looks like. We've got a whole design going there. And really the larger picture is that through our work, we're experimenting. We're in a pilot stage of 5 years. First 5 years, this is our early business stages where we are understanding what can be the best model. And can we have a development model through creating forests where we have the people, planet, profit being addressed? Because unless these three things go together, we're gonna fall short. And the first signs of this model are showing. This was taken in November 2018. We had about 50 villages come to us saying that, hey, we want to start planting our forests. Can we get trained? We want to invest ourselves. We hear that you work on leadership. What is leadership? I want to know. And To date, as I speak to you, this figure has gone to 90 villages. Our target was to reach out to 100 villages in 5 years, and we've already received interest from 90 villages. So that's a customer acquisition. We are working on that aspect. So I keep coming back to leadership. So we are leveraging technology to spread it, but the only way we'll enable people to act, which is the key determining factor for impact, is by investing in people. So we are developing now an eco-leadership course, and young people are the first people that we reach out to because they're most responsive. And we want to start running out this program from next year. So how can you help? How can you be part of this? Well, I'll make no bones about it. I'm running a business here. So I'll say I need investment. When I take all my costs and I convert it into a sapling, because that's our unit, ultimately all our work gets converted and seen and manifests itself into more and more forests. So we've come to a figure of 242 rupees per sapling. And if each of us was to plant one sapling every month, we would spend about 2,900 rupees a year. And each of us in this room was to convince one other friend to do that. In 1 year, we could plant 10,000 saplings, 90% of which would live. And they would create livelihoods, they would create community leaders, and they would bring our forests back little by little. So spread the word, write to me, my email is right there. Join the movement, and I invite you. It's slightly colder, but I invite you to come to the mountains and plant. Thank you.